The Joe Rogan Experience.
The point I'm getting to here is, given Jeffrey Epstein's involvement in the BCCI network, given Jeffrey's involvement in the 1990s with all the foreign policy activities happening in the Middle East at that time, given Jeffrey Epstein's, involvement through, the early 2000s Clinton era and everything, given his involvement in everything from Israeli to Saudi to British to French high-level government officials, Jeffrey Epstein was investigated by the SEC in the 1980s. He was one of the two people who ran the biggest Ponzi scheme in history at the time in the United States, the Towers financial collapse. Epstein's business partner goes to jail for like 30 years or 20 years or whatever. But Epstein skates completely free. Epstein gets involved in this huge fraud in the U.S. Virgin Islands with this, like $1 billion fraud case in the U.S. Virgin Islands, never prosecuted for any of it. Why is that? Well, one is, he may have, we know in the U.S. Virgin Islands case, he was sponsoring the campaigns, basically, of the politicians there. The prosecutors answer to the politicians. Could be that. But I would be shocked if they're in 40 years of this Where's Waldo, Forrest Gump, he's always in the room, in 40 years of American foreign policy and intelligence activity, money sourcing for all the crimes that Epstein committed, the concern was the same one they had with Rolando Masfer. Don't bring the case, and if you do, bring it in a highly limited way. And that's exactly what happened in 2006, the first time he was indicted. Everybody was up in arms that it was a sweetheart plea deal. It gave protection to all co-conspirators, known and unknown. And it was swooped in quickly before, there was a trial in full, so that lines of evidence couldn't be opened about the network.
It's just crazy that statutory rape is what took it all down, right? Because it's underage hand jobs, right? That's what took it all down.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be what took Jeffrey Epstein down.
Kind of crazy.
Even that has a really interesting geopolitical history. There was a similar scandal in the early 2000s with a private military contractor called DynCorp, which again runs through this Adnan Khashoggi kind of Middle Eastern network. DynCorp got in trouble for trafficking, facilitating the traffic. It was a major U.S. military and CIA contractor for logistics and institutional support and military assistance on the ground for the U.S. military all over the world. They got in trouble basically trafficking underage kids to Middle Eastern sheikhs. And I believe in the early 2000s, and I believe the reason that was alleged by Congress that they did that was to juice the deals with them. That basically, these people who were critical. If you're operating on the ground in Kuwait or, pick your Middle Eastern, country, in order to serve your purpose for the U.S. government to be this outside, plausibly deniable, but extensively infrastructured professional support outfit on the ground, you need the support of the local government. You need the support of the local high-level officials. They need to be happy. And there's several currencies for that. There's financial payoffs, and there's other things they might like parties and young women, especially in places where being with the very young female is not illegal. And so what DynCorp, I believe, got busted doing, and you can look up the DynCorp scandal here, was doing this. And I believe their argument was, well, you wanted us to do this thing on the ground. You wanted us to help the U.S. military and, kind of covert support nodes that were happening here. We had to do it somehow. This is part of what helped us do that. I would not be surprised if the Epstein trafficking apparatus started with similar motivations. not, that it's not for necessarily for blackmail, but because it makes clients or customers or, VIP people happy. It makes them owe you something. It makes them want to get involved in a deal you do, even if the deal is not one they would ordinarily do, because they just want to stay close to you because you're their supplier of the thing, of their vice, of the thing that they, want but can't get. If you're a 70-year-old billionaire, you can't walk into a bar and leave aside the underage thing. You can't walk into a bar, and meet an 18-year-old who's, I presume, these things are facilitated at private parties, and it needs to, for a lot of these guys, it has to be discreet. They've got wives, they've got reputations, and there's an aspect of this that plays out at every institution. I worked at a New York law firm, and there's ways that you can make partner. At least this was kind of the vibe that I felt like. Some people make partner because they're really good technically at what they do. They're just amazing. They're just technical whizzes on the minutia of how to structure a merger or acquisition. They're just really great at structuring an offshore banking transaction, or they just know absolutely everything about tax law. There's some people who move up because of nepotism. They're the brother and they're the son-in-law of a major partner. There's some people who make partner because they brought in one client who's just a really big rainmaker. And there's some people who move up because they open doors to partners while they're associates. They introduce them to someone. They host events. They've got, tickets to exclusive things. And the partners just like being around that person because they get access to that person in a currency that they can't get on their own. And that includes hosting, cool, exotic parties, having, attractive women. I've never been convinced that the central role of the Epstein young girl, in my view, sidebar of the Epstein money laundering story is that it was for blackmail. And part of this is because the moment Jeffrey Epstein officially threatens somebody with blackmail, and that person tells his wife, and that wife tells her friends, and that gets out to somebody else that knows Jeffrey Epstein's access goes away overnight. That's the sort of thing that even a rumor of that spreading, and nobody else is going to want to do business with them.
So you think people just assume it's blackmail because that is how you would blackmail someone, especially underage girls?
I think it is very possible that there could have been indirect blackmail, meaning Epstein passes it on to an intelligence service, to a corporate espionage client or something, and they use that for their own purposes. But even then, imagine, for example, if, like on the Bill Gates thing, like there was Bill Gates gets an email, I have a video of you sleeping with this person, and, or somebody much lower level. The moment they send that to the press, if, in order to, they figure they have nothing to lose. There's not been anybody in the 7 years that's transpired who said, I was personally blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. I think because the moment you do that, nobody comes to your parties anymore. You lose all the access. You lose all the deal flow. You lose all the goodwill that you've generated because this rumor, people are very risk averse, especially at that level.
Right. But just to have it over their head and never use it, though.
Right. Well, I think that what you could have is, because he does his own nefarious stuff, he could compile it so that if they ever threaten him with something, he's now got something on them. And I've seen some correspondence that, in the files that looks like that might not be an impossible scenario.
Do you think that's how Jeffrey Epstein got in that position in the first place, that they knew he had this kink?
No, not at all. I mean, Adnan Khashoggi had the same thing. Adnan Khashoggi was running around with dozens of young and apparently underage girls the whole time. I think that Jeffrey Epstein probably learned how powerful that can be through that network, seeing that's what powerful people do, that gives them something that gets them a lot of local influence and wins them a lot of favor.
That's a very specific illicit desire to want underage people.
Well,
how do you even find out that someone's into that?
Well, I don't think that the majority or anything close to it of the women were technically. I mean, I think it was largely
young,
very young, barely legal, so to speak. But and I know that there were cases of underage, but I think
most of it was just
very, very young, but not like
20-year-old
not
girls,
like 13
18-year-old girls.
type thing. And then remember, because this is an international enterprise, and many of the clients are like in countries that don't necessarily have the same norms about that that we do. You can very easily see someone getting involved in that just because girls juice deals. And so I don't think that Epstein, I've not seen evidence, and in my view, you don't need any of that to understand the core part of the Epstein story that has relevance to your life today in terms of your own government and the workings of power and corporate finance and the like. But I do think that girls juice deals, and the fact that he had the coolest parties on a private island with the hottest girls is something that
also brought in a lot of intellectuals, stimulating conversations, scientists, all these very interesting people. So that was part of the thing, right? That was the draw.
Try hosting a cool party as a guy with a bad ratio, so to speak.
Sausage party.
With a sausage party. And when you develop a reputation for having attractive women at the parties you host, you become an important person to know in the network, because basically every male has a desire for attractive women, not saying underage, obviously, but that is like a universal biological desire for men to want to be around attractive women.
And what did they do for gay guys?
I have no idea.
Is that a part of the file or the lore?
I've not seen evidence of it. Or if I have, I can't recall it offhand. But again,
the whole point is he's throwing these very attractive, cool parties to get all these people together.
But that's what juices deals.
Right.
If you take this scenario, Epstein's running a fund. A donor, a colleague, someone that he'd like to do a favor for, or an intelligence service says, hey, we're trying to get a pipeline built in the Middle East. We need a facilitator to help arrange private outside funding for it, so this thing can be constructed, and it doesn't look like it's coming from the U.S. government, or just, but the U.S. government will provide some sort of loan guarantee or something on it, but we can't raise enough money to do this. It needs to come from the outside, but it would really help American national security, and there's probably something in it for you if you can get this done. Epstein then goes out and says then puts out basically, tries to make contact with people in his network who might be interested in that deal. And then goes out to 5 people. 2 of them are in the space locally. The deal terms look good. They want to do it 100%, no hesitation. And then 2 people say, well, listen, it's a good idea in concept, but I don't know, the risk profile on it looks a little high. This normally would not be something that my team would clear. It's interesting, but it's a little rich for my blood in terms of the risk profile. But Jeffrey Epstein asked them to do it. And Jeffrey Epstein, for the past 3 years of their lives has been the best weekend they've ever had, has made them feel alive again in their, mid 50s or 60s, has opened all sorts of other deals for them. And this deal might work out. So I'm afraid that if I say no to Jeffrey Epstein on this deal, I'm not going to get an invite to the next party.